Hey everybody, it's Al here. Welcome to another Mind Over Magic guide. This one's going to be exploring the various, class types of your mages as far as the school of magic that they specialize in. And we'll be exploring each one in detail and what the advantages are related to playing the game as well as in combat and what you can expect from your early mage staff and students. So first thing is a lot of people would wonder is which two, if you're playing Relentless, which you should be, this game's not that hard, which two mages should I start with? And there are obviously pros and cons to all of it, but I'm going to give you a quick opinion of mine and I'll go over two of those options, okay? So nature is going to be the first one I'm discussing. I honestly believe that a nature mage should be one of your first choices. The reason why is because nature mages, they are great for harvesting. So that's collecting the natural resources like wood, berries, and so on. They're quite good at tending to crops, which means planting seeds and fertilizing them, not harvesting them. And they're awesome for chopping. Okay, so again, chopping down trees. In the early game, you are going to be doing a lot of harvesting and a lot of chopping. And eventually you will, quite early on, get crops started for your food. So a nature mage is an excellent choice as a starting mage. For your second choice, an excellent mage to take is an earth mage. Now, the reason why is because earth mages, they excel at constructing. And in the early game, right out of the gate, you are going to be building a lot to build your mage school. They are good at constructing walls, floors, ceilings, and so on. All the actual building types parts. And again, you'll do a lot of that. But they're also good at mining, and you will need to do some mining. You're going to need to acquire resources from the earth. That would include stone and iron. So now you've basically got the resources you'll need early on covered with a nature mage and an earth mage, where this one can easily do harvesting and chopping, and this one could do mining, but also constructing. So starting with these two, nature and earth, is an excellent choice for starting the game. So that would be my choice, particularly when you start a new game. So now we discuss what make good starting mages and the reasons that we would be interested in them. Let's look at some of the other mages and what they're useful for. So what are our options? We have fire, earth, water, dark, nature, lightning, and air. So those are the options for starting mages. Now I already talked the features about the earth, nature, and air mage and why you might consider taking them earlier, why they make good choices early. But if we want to really understand what everyone's good at, you simply can go into your priority tab and you start looking at hovering over here, and they'll tell you which school excels at these things. Right, so that's a good way to check as far as which one. Also, depending on the school they're from, it will highlight the things that it's appropriate for their school. So for example, Gwendolyn is an earth mage, and then when we look, you can see construction, mining, carving, repairing. These are all things that they are good at. Paige is an air mage, or a nature mage, and Paige, nature, good at making wands, harvesting, tending crops, chopping crops. Then Anais is an air mage, and air mages are good at assembling furniture, painting, and hauling. So that gives you a little bit of an idea as to how you can go and check what our particular mages are good at. So there are some more game features, though, that some of them excel in, that as you get deeper in the game, you will further understand. But they generally require you to create mages as students, train them up, and make sure that they are going to be more powerful than your initial starting staff. And that's a very important thing about your starting staff. Do not fall in love with these. You are not going to keep your starting staff because they do not grow skills. Okay? So the longer you have them, they're not training, they're not gaining skills. They're not even getting new wands. They start with the basic level 1 wand, and they start locked at level 3 as their actual level. So they are not going to be able to get better over time. So the idea is that you will eventually retire them and replace them with mages that you've created who are more advanced. And you can see here, Ida, who is a fire mage. Ida has a fire wand too. Okay, I can't get wand level 2 for these other guys. It's because I made this and then recruited her with fire wand 2 that I was able to get that wand. Also, if you notice, she has the ability to go up to level 5, to be trained up to level 5. That surpasses what these other mages, the starting ones, can achieve. So it is important to understand that the initial mages you get are there to serve a purpose, and eventually they will be replaced and retired out with stronger mages that you create yourself. So understanding that is important. That's why I say taking a nature mage and an earth mage to start with is quite important, because they'll be so useful to you in the early game, and then eventually you will replace them out, maybe from the same school, maybe with different mages. So the next mage I want to explore is the lightning mage. This teacher that used to be a student is a lightning mage. One of the main reasons that lightning mages are so powerful is because when you recruit students, you have the option to summon a gifted student. Okay, and that's what Ida was. She was summoned as a gifted student. Okay, they come in much more powerful. Now, in order to summon a gifted student, okay, if you have less than 3 students, okay, so say you have only 2 students, when you go to summon a gifted student, it will say 1 staff must have lightning skill 3. Okay, so if you did take a lightning mage as your starting mage, you technically could immediately start summoning gifted students, except you won't have the arcane scrolls and adept scrolls to do that. So I don't think that that makes sense to do. I think what happens is, as you advance in the game, eventually you pick up a lightning mage as a staff member, one of your students, and then when you're starting to get arcane scrolls, adept scrolls at a consistent rate, you can start to only summon gifted students, and that is leading you forward into creating these more powerful mages that are eventually going to replace your existing staff so that you have grown in power. So lightning mages are specifically for this purpose, as well as when we go and check in the priorities, we can quickly see. We'll find Dylan here. He's a lightning mage. What is he good at? Well, we know he's very good at charging, which is refilling mana lanterns. And I won't explain what mana lanterns are, but it's where mages basically get their mana refueled from. And it is the lightning mage who excels at refueling them. Okay? They also are quite good at scrying or scriven, and this means creating and copying scrolls. That is more of a mid-game thing. It takes a while before you will actually unlock that, but once you do, you would definitely want a lightning mage who's going to be the one doing your scroll work, who's creating scrolls and copying scrolls. Lastly, they are excellent at research. And even though research is something that you do very early on and you need to do a lot of it, I don't think just because they're good at it that we necessarily would prioritize taking one. But we do definitely pick them up quite early. In fact, I would say the order would be that you would your first students would all be lightning mages, and when you get one that is exceptional, that is when you would make them a staff member, so you could start recruiting gifted students, having someone who can research at a faster rate, and eventually that they can start doing scrying. The next mage that we'll examine is the air mage. Right here, an ace. The air mage, and we can go and look in priorities, and we already talked a little bit about them already, but they excel at creating the items in your school, which is not something you do that much of, but they are faster at assembling them. They are very good at painting, which is more of a mid-game thing when you start making paintings, and they're very good at hauling. However, your students are very limited in what they're allowed to do, but they can all haul. So I tend to usually have my students doing hauling and cleaning activities because it's they just can't do a lot of the other stuff. And my air mage is primarily going to be allocated towards doing painting and assembling items, as well as other tasks around the base. So air mages are not a necessity, and I don't think you should necessarily take them very early in the playthrough. I think you should look to taking them at the point that you are starting to get into the mid-game. I definitely think that there are other mages that you need to prioritize over air mages for what they're able to offer you. The next mage we'll look at is the fire mage. Fire mages serve more of a combative purpose. However, outside of combat, we should examine what they're capable of doing. So if we look at Petra here, they are very good at cooking, which you do a lot of. So they are nice to have around to be your designated cook. They are able to destroy things, and when it says destroy, realize it means destroying plants that are in the way. Okay, it doesn't mean destroying. It's called disintegrate when you remove your buildings and so on. This just means destroy plants. They're very good at hunting, so all the little wild animals that when they go over to attack them, so we can kill the rats to get the regents, they will do much more damage to them, and so they will die faster, and they're better at harvesting them. And that's the main primary things that fire mages are good at. Fire mages, however, are very good in combat, in my opinion, and have certain features that we'll talk when we go over the combat details. But for as far as in the actual game itself, that's what the fire mage features, is being good at shooting things and at cooking. So the next mage we'll look at is the water wand mage. And the water wand mage is unique in that it specializes in alchemy and cleaning. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you will be brewing potions, and potions are quite useful in this game. And the reason why they're so useful is because they're one of your primary sources of healing your mages after battles, where they don't have to just rest in bed and slowly heal it up. Once they go to the medical bed, you can give them healing potions, and it will fix them like based on the strength of the potion immediately. And there's other potions for removing various quirks and diseases and things like that. So they are a bit of a necessity to have. So they're good at alchemy, but alchemy is something you get into kind of like I'd say the early mid game. And becomes more important later on. So they're definitely not necessarily a mage I would take as my starting mage, and I certainly wouldn't be taking them very early. They are something I'm going to add quite later in the game, but they're also extremely good at cleaning. Now, keep in mind that students can also clean, and so having a mage that's good at cleaning purposely for doing cleaning around the base, that's not really a good use of a resource. Eventually, of course, you would prioritize them when you do have one into cleaning because they'll be very good at it. Now, why you have to always, of course, be good at cleaning is simply because if you keep a messy base, then bad things will happen, especially with oozes showing up. And the oozes will come in your kitchen when it's dirty, and they'll start damaging everything. But I tend to always have my students focused on cleaning and hauling to keep the oozes at bay, as well as the spirit that starts with you. You can also do that as well and let them be the one in charge of cleaning so your mages can focus on other things. So water mages are useful mid to mid-late, I would say. The last mage to look at, one of my favorites, is the dark mage, dark wands. Dark mages are mid to late game for sure, okay? Because what they are able to do is to quilt. And again, quilting is something that you're not going to get into that early. You're going to be getting into it around mid to late. This is for creating undead helpers, which once you get undead helpers going on, it's going to alleviate the pressure on your staff for things that they just don't need to focus on. Right? So they have that ability to create undead helpers through this quilt command. But again, it is not something that you're going to be working on early, so therefore this dark mages are not going to be very useful in the early game, and you shouldn't be taking them as your starting mage. It's something that you want to recruit later on, mid to end game, and then starting to focus on them, because they definitely will end up making your S tier teams later down the road and be required. You'll want to have them, as well as they're good for wards. So the wards are for the protective magic that it resets underschool wards. I won't get into that in too depth, but you're going to have wards that you're dealing with when you're doing the underschool, and they have this ability to use certain magic to cause it to reset. They also are able to enable Scarecrow and Fog Aegeus to function. And there will be, again, mid to late game where Scarecrow, being able to make scarecrows, is going to be important, and certainly working the Fog Aegeus as well. But again, that's not stuff that you're going to do in the early game. So this is not something that you're necessarily going to be wanting to take early, unless you're specifically deciding that you want to use them in the early mid game as a combat type mage. However, because they're not going to be useful outside of combat, I still believe a fire mage will be much better, because a fire mage can cook and a fire mage can kill rats and they also are excellent in combat. So one thing to know about these dark mages, they have a chance to dodge attacks. So that is a mitigation ability, and it's quite nice to be able to be in combat and dodge. The nature mage in combat. So when we're looking at the nature mage, they'll come with these two spells. Growth 2, which basically puts thorns on a targeted position for a certain amount of rounds. Growth 2 will do it for 3 rounds. Growth 1 does it for 2 rounds. So the basic idea is to say that they will go and do some damage, and you'll do 17 damage, and you will also put thorns on the ground. And the thorns will deal 10 damage to the monster on the slot at the end of the round, or if they ever get moved from the slot. So, and keep in mind, it's not when they attack, it's at the end of the round. So if you know the round's about to end, you can actually do 27 damage quite quickly to a monster. And the other one is Surging Strength. Okay, Surging Strength at level 1 will add 10 power to the allies in a targeted row. So you can pick a row, back row or front row. So the first level that you get is level 1, and it's based on what wand they're wielding. It would do 10 power, but Surging Strength 2 does 20 power. And it just adds a base of 10 damage. 10 power equals 10 damage to their abilities. So we can see that if we wanted to use Surging Strength 2, we simply would target this row and we could apply it to these two. In my opinion, the Nature Mage's usefulness in a combat environment is mid. It is very nice to be able to buff up your DPS mages, but sometimes you have to consider, is that extra power you've added to the 2 attacks that they're going to do, is that better than just having another DPS mage? I don't really particularly find the Thorns ability very useful. Maybe if you were moving, shuffling things around and could get it to multiply, it would be good. But buffing the other mages can have its uses. But I do not favor really a nature mage in combat. I would not put them on my S tier combat team. The next mage for combat that we'll look at is the Fire Mage. Now, Fire Mage is kind of unique in that they have Vengeance, and they can put a Retaliate on a row. And what will happen then is whenever that row takes damage or gets attacked, they will fire back a retaliation shot. Now, you have to consider, it does cost 40 mana, which is not cheap by any means, okay? It's a fair amount of mana. And at the level 1, Vengeance 1 adds 15 Retaliate to the targeted row. Where this might have a great use is against creatures that will AoE, because if you have a creature that's going to AoE all 4 of them, that's going to get retaliated on by both guys, and if you had the Vengeance on both rows and they AoE'd you, they would end up taking like 60 points of damage as a return blow. So you have to really consider the numbers. Would it be better to do a Vengeance, or would it be better to fire a shot? Well, if I put Vengeance on these two and they're going to get attacked, then I would do 30 damage. However, the Fireball that she has, Fireball 2, and again, that's level 2 Fireball, it would do more damage than that. So it's kind of a weight game. I can tell you when I use Fire Mages, I never use Vengeance. I always just use Fireball. It's a cheaper mana cost, and it does quite a amount of damage. But the main feature of the Fire Mage that I think a lot of people who've written guides and say Fire Mages are subpar compared to the other mages because their spells do less damage, they're not taking into account the unbelievable crit rate that a Fire Mage has. For example, so that 70-point crit attack just turned into 140. And you can reliably get that crit. 50% is significant, okay, as a crit rate. And especially once you get them powered up, because you can see that this one is only using a level 2 wand, has Fireball 2, and we have some power modifiers going on, but already this one can strike for 45 damage, but the other one here was striking for 70 damage, right? So you can start to get that to spiral out of control, and these are not full Fire Mages. They are still mid-level. Even Petra's a mid-level, what I would say for a Fire Mage. So their damage can really spiral out because of the excessively high crit rate. Next, we'll look at the Air Mage in combat and what her abilities are. So she gets Shield of Wind, which will add a shield of 1 to a targeted ally. The shield will prevent all damage from the next time a mage is attacked in battle. This ability can be semi-useful for basically protecting your front line if you are bringing DPS heavy teams. For example, I have a lightning mage in the front row here because I wanted to bring more raw power. So it might be useful to then put that on him, knowing he's probably going to take a shot and that it will be completely prevented. It's also very good if you're in a situation where you're worried that one of your mages took too many hits and they're going to die. So we would throw that protection onto a low hit point mage to make sure they could see the end of the battle. The other ability they have, which only costs 10 mana, which is quite nice, or one of the more damaging spells in the game for just normal damage. And it basically, it says it does 15 damage, right? But that's partially because of the power modifiers. Thing is, though, as we can see here, it strikes 3 times, so it does 45. Now, that could have issues where, if something was had a shield on, the first one would knock off the shield and the second 2 would hit. Where you could buff up their power, it would buff all those attacks. So you might be able to get that to go quite high. The next mage for combat we'll look at is the Earth Mage. The Earth Mage is quite good. Generally, I like my Earth Mages to be the Vivified race because they'll be tanky and they'll have high hit points. But the main reason that these guys are so tanky is due to Earth Armor. So Earth Armor adds Taunt 2, which means that the next time an enemy can target a mage with an attack on their turn, they will. So that'll happen for 2 times, right? And it adds 60 armor. And the armor will just directly absorb the incoming damage. So we can put that on him, and now they will attack him. And the armor, depending on how much they attack for, will generally negate the damage being done. Which means your other mages aren't going to be taking hits and damage, and that he's not going to be taking damage. So you can, if you bring him with 3 DPS, it is possible to get through an entire combat with receiving no damage whatsoever. Therefore, they don't get any in-pain stress, and they don't need to heal after the combat. So these guys can be quite powerful, and I highly recommend using them in combat. His other ability is called Smash 2, and it will deal plus 20 damage when he is at full hit points. Okay, so if he is at full hit points, it hits harder. Now you can see he's currently he is not at full hit points, and therefore it's not going to do a great deal of damage. It's going to do 17 damage. This is a good finisher. I would always use Earth Armor. That's his purpose. Unless you're down to the last creature, or you have a creature that's at very low hit points and you want to finish it off so your DPS mages can focus on the one with higher hit points. But almost always, the purpose of the Earth Mage is to simply tank. Tank by casting Earth Armor himself, taunting the damage, having it shielded off, and just doing that every single round. Next mage we'll focus on for combat is the Lightning Mage. The Lightning Mage is kind of interesting because they can hit the back row. Their spell doesn't get blocked. It's not a direct pathway damage. It comes from the ceiling. So sometimes when you have multiple monsters, the back row cannot be attacked until the other ones are dead. And maybe you have something very nasty back there and you want to get rid of it quickly. So at least the Lightning Mage can attack any target no matter what the condition. Not bad. It's 15 mana to do 30 damage. It's kind of baseline, and certainly when they get powered up, you can get this to become quite lethal. It does not compare, though, of course, to the raw firepower of the Fire Mage. His other ability is called Recharge, and it can be quite useful because what it's going to do is give an ally 30 more mana, regain 30 mana, and they gain 30 speed. So there are going to be situations where rather than saying, oh, I'm going to do this damage, depending on what the turn order is looking like, it would be smarter to simply give another mage, like a Fire Mage, the mana, so they can cast a spell perhaps, but also get that speed boost, so they're going to go first. So you can see situations where not only are they very good for hitting the back row, doing consistent damage, DPS, but as well as coming into play where they can augment the other mages to be able to go before the enemy. You could even go and say, oh, I'm going to recharge the tank. I want to make sure the tank gets to go first so the tank can armor itself up, taunt, and not get all the damage going towards him before the rest of us act. So definitely is a good combat mage, but if you're talking about wanting a DPS mage, then I do not necessarily feel that they are what you would call a DPS mage. They're mid at best. They do about DPS as to what some of the others do. When it comes to DPS mages, fire mages are pretty much unparalleled due to the crit rate as far as the kind of damage they can deal out. So the next mage we'll talk about for combat abilities is the water mage. The water mage has soak, and soak is a debuff that will hit an enemy and lower their power and speed by 7, and it has a mana cost of 40. Now it does do damage. Its base damage is 15. So overall, it's not that impressive. The damage is fairly subpar. The debuffing of power and speed of the enemy it's significant enough that it combines together with the base damage to be, I don't know, situational. But the mana cost of 40 is quite high. I mean, he could cast 2 soaks and he'd be out of mana, for example. So I think that it costs too much for what it does. Still need to experiment with some. Perhaps there's some late game mobs that you would go up against where debuffing their power and speed is actually makes a lot of sense. And maybe you get some monsters that have AoE debuffing their power would make some sense. But overall, I think you've always got better choices when it comes to doing damage and ignoring the fact that it's very limited where you'll be wanting to debuff power and speed. The other ability is called Torrent. It attacks an enemy and its base damage is 10, which is quite low. However, it deals plus 20 damage when attacking from the back row. So again, if you are going to place this mage in a back row, suddenly its base damage is going to be 30. That's not bad. That's on par with the other mages as far as what their DPS attacks are able to do. Next we have the Dark Mage. The Dark Mage is quite interesting in that Dark Mages have something called cover. So when they're attacked, a mage of cover has a chance to dodge the attack. So they do have a built-in dodge into them, like just built in. So they're quite good in the front row because they will dodge some attacks and mitigate them fully. Their first ability, though, is called Shadow Cloak. It adds a cloak to an allied position for 2 rounds. Assumingly, you can cast this, of course, on yourself. And it grants dodge 25% to whoever is in that combat slot. So what you do is you can cast it on the Dark Mage in the front row, and they'll get their natural dodge plus 25% dodge additional from the spell being cast. And it does last for 2 rounds. So the round that you cast it, and then the next round following. It does pair up nicely, though, with their other ability called Tentacle Lash. Tentacle Lash attacks an enemy and deals a plus 40 damage when attacking from Shadow Cloak. Okay, so now you're able to on the first round to cast this on yourself, and it's now going to allow you to maybe mitigate some hits if you're in the front row and not use a taunt tank. And it's going to last then for the next round as well. Well, on this next round, you're going to be able to attack a creature for a base damage of 20 plus 40 and do 60 damage to them. And that's at a base. So if you consider the mitigation along with the ability to now dish out 60 damage on a hit, you are basically over 2 rounds doing 30 damage, effectively 30 damage per round. That's pretty much on par with a lot of the other DPS mages at base power as to what they are able to do, but you're getting the mitigation as well. However, you do delay doing that damage for 1 round. There are going to be situations, though, where I think that you can really weave that damage so that you're maximizing that 60 damage, depending on which enemy you try to throw it at. And then along with the fact that you likely will dodge maybe 1 or 2 attacks over those 2 rounds and mitigate that damage. So when you compare that to just other mages who just have like basically a base of DPS of 30 damage per round, this, even though it's delayed, ends up being, I think, slightly more effective simply because you get the built-in mitigation. So I would consider taking them as a great choice for your second slot in a lineup in the front row. Okay, so now we want to examine about overall with combat as far as all the mage classes go, and who are the DPSers? Well, because you have to remember for example, if we look at Petra and we examine her Fireball 2. And Fireball 2 has a base damage of 20, but she has a power modifier of 30. So now she's hitting for 50 plus the crit rate. Okay, so it gives you an average of 75 damage per shot for 20 mana. However, all the mages can get power modifiers. And so we have to look at each base damage and consider what it means. So all starting mages, they begin with Fireball 2. Like fire mages, they start with Fireball 2, which is a base damage of 20, and that's what we should use for our calculations. So basically, the fire mage is 20 plus the 50% chance. So we can really look at that they have an average base damage of 30. So fire mages are getting average base damage or DPS of 30 at a 20 mana cost. Now, if I look at a nature mage, her main DPS ability called Growth, it's doing a base damage of 15, right? And then it applies Thorns to the position for 3 rounds. Okay, so Thorns will deal 10 damage at the end of the round. So even the round that you cast it is going to do that 10 damage. So a nature mage, even just within a 1 round positioning, is going to be doing 25 damage for a mana cost of 14. But that Thorns, if the creature lives, will still do 10 more the next round and 10 more the next round. So you could theoretically say that a nature mage over a 3-round fight, provided that that creature lives, could be doing as high as 45 damage. However, that does mean that you are leaving that creature up and alive. And as you power modify this ability, this Thorns will not scale with it. So while it's comparable, it's not necessarily going with the general theory, which is, burn down, like cast at the same target. Everyone target the same target. Burn it down as fast as possible so it dies and it stops doing damage, because Thorns needs more time to click in. So I'm not that infused, but it does have a low mana cost associated with it. However, the additional thing of Thorns does not grow with the power modifiers that you would add on to it. In 3, 2, 1. So if we examine the DPS ability of the Earth Mage, its ability Smash has a base damage of 10. However, if you attack while you're at full hit points, you'll get plus 20. And that costs mana 10. Assuming that you're at full hit points and you can somehow maintain that, you can effectively be doing 30 damage for 10 mana, which is pretty nice. That's definitely a good return on damage for the mana cost, but it requires you to remain at full hit points. It's not like you can take an Earth Mage and just continually be chugging out 30 damage a round. No, you would have to use their other ability or have another mage protect you to get armor, taunt, and then in the next round you would be able to use the Smash and hopefully for the full amount. So the only time you're going to reliably get off that 30 damage is the first round of combat, provided that the Earth Mage gets to go first. So I don't think we can really consider that their pure DPS is comparable to the other mages. When we look at the Air Mage, we have a base damage of 3. But it attacks 3 times. So you technically can do 9 damage base for 10 mana. Now that sounds horrible on face value, but the reality is that it scales extremely well with power modifiers. You have to consider for an Air Mage, the more power modifiers you can get, it's times 3. So let's say you hit a power modifier of 40. Now it's 43 is the damage you're going to do for 10 mana, but it's times 3. So you're now pushing pretty high levels of damage for mana if the mage is powered up appropriately. But certainly at its base, it's really one of the weakest amounts of damage to dish out for the mana cost, even though it's only 10 mana. The Lightning Mage, they have a base damage of 25 at a mana cost of 15. It's fairly, for the damage ratio, it's fairly well balanced. Still, I think though it was they took the lightning mage and really wanted it to be sort of like the standard where we would benchmark the other mages against. So we consider this base damage 25, mana cost 15. It's pretty nice overall. I guess the big advantage of the DPS on Bolt is the fact that you can hit any target on the field, not just their front row. So perhaps that is the advantage. However, the power modifiers that you add to it are not going to do anything other than just add pure raw damage. There's no scaling ability like, let's say, that the Air Mage would scale very, very well due to the ×3 attacks it gets, and all that power goes directly into it. And then with the Fire Mage, the higher that their overall attack total damage is, the crit adds 50% to whatever that value is. So when we're examining the Water Mage from the pure DPS perspective, they actually have 2 DPS attacks. So the first one, base damage 15 with no scaling whatsoever. It does debuff the enemy, but let's just ignore that for now. But it has a mana cost of 40. This is not a effective way to be doing just DPS. If you want to debuff, that's what you're paying for. Their other attack, Torrent 2, is comparable because it has a base damage of 10, but can get a 20 damage bonus when attacking from the back row. And this is not something that is going to be taken away from you very easily. You are going to be able to stick them in the back row, and you are going to be able to do 30 damage turn after turn after turn with them, and the mana cost is going to be 10. So now you have an ability from the Water Mage that can do 30 damage for 10 mana, and we are on comparison level with what the Lightning Mage can do. Except they will not be able to hit back row targets until the pathway is cleared. Lastly, we talked a lot about this, about how the Dark Mage works for DPS, but let's just look at it overall again. So once again, we've got a 2-turn attack that's going to result in a base damage of 20 plus 40 for the Shadow Cloak. So they're going to do 60 damage over 2 turns, as well as providing some mitigation. The mana cost, though, to set that up over 2 turns is going to be 20 mana plus 15 mana. So it's 35 mana. You divide that by 2, and you've got approximately 17 mana. So that's not bad when we're talking about 17 mana over 30, and you couple that in with the protective status as well. What is my honest opinion? I really believe that it will depend on what point in the game you are. I think early on, both Fire Mages and Lightning Mages, and even the Dark Mage, when it comes to DPS, are excellent choices. But you will find, though, that very quickly the Air Mage, with even a plus 10 modifier, is suddenly doing 30 damage per round, comparable for the mana cost. Like, they are on par. All you need to do is get even one more modifier into that, and suddenly an Air Mage can deal significant scaled up damage, similar how a Fire Mage significantly scales up as well. But because the Fire Mage is got a heavier mana cost for their spell, 20 mana, compared to the 10 mana cost on the Air Mage, or even the 17 cost with the mitigation of the Dark Mage, it does appear to me that the ideal, if you're talking about, I want a DPSer, and you're not really interested in the other aspects, the Air Mage is going to power up and be able to do far more significant damage than all the other ones when it comes to DPS. And then the next one in line that's going to be able to scale up, and as you power them up higher and higher and do far more damage off the base abilities, will be the Fire Mage. The last note I'm going to say, realize this only applies probably to the early to mid game, because once you start getting more powerful mages, they're going to have other spells unlocked, and those spells are going to start to change the entire theory of the DPS. Once fire mages get the their larger fireball spell. That can significantly change how things work. So yeah, this is good just for theory for the early game, as far as like when you're saying, hey, I've got the, maybe the first 20 rounds of combat as I'm building my school and trying to build my mages up. Who should I be using as my DPSers, or who should I be taking into the fights? And the reality is you just have to weigh the pure DPS over the mana cost against what else does that spell add to the equation that might make your survivability a little bit higher, and so on. So really, it's quite subjective early on, but I would say that again, fire mages, lightning mages, and an air mage who has at least a power bonus of 10 are all going to be quite on par, and the dark mage is going to make an excellent second companion for your front row, due to the mitigation and the fact that they can also maintain that DPS for mana cost at a fairly decent rate. But certainly, I would always probably want to be throwing into that mix an Earth Mage, because of all the things we've looked at, only the Earth Mage is capable of tanking the hits like the way we would want them to. With a taunt, they're the only one with access to a taunt, and they're the only one who's putting up that protection and taking no damage while they're taunting, so all your DPSers can do their job and burn down the creatures before too much damage rains in. Anyhow, I hope you found this guide useful. I will be making more guides about Mind Over Magic, because I really enjoy this game and it has a lot of depth to it. I know there's not that many YouTube videos that have been made about this game. There's barely any real in-depth guides. That's because not a lot of people have played it that deep. And the depth is quite extensive in it, and the grind is very real in this game. Once you start trying to get into the mid-level research, the amount of arcane scrolls you need is excessive, and especially since you need arcane scrolls for powering up and recruiting more powerful mages and so on, the demands are quite high. So this is not the kind of game where somebody can just sit down for a day and be done with it, reach the end game, know everything there is to know about it. And so that's why I don't think there's not that many guides out right now about mid to end game. And since I plan to be playing this pretty much non-stop until I get to that end game, I will hopefully be making more guides about ideal starting strategies, mid-game strategies, how to do various designs, how to evaluate your starting conditions in Relentless, what should be prioritized, how to speed run to get mages online that are going to be powered up, and so on. And of course, that requires me doing lots of play to unlock that all. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it. And feel free to subscribe if you're interested in this game or other base building colony type games. It's pretty much all I play and make videos about. And leave a comment if you feel that I maybe am wrong about some of my opinions on these mages. If you feel that maybe some of these mages are going to be better in combat than what I've advertised, or worse, for example. Or if you feel that my starting picks are incorrect, I'm always happy to hear feedback, always happy to hear suggestions. With that being said, I really hope that you give this game a try. It's really wonderful to play. And so we'll see you in the next one.